Ariel. I'm super excited to get to talk to you.
Thanks for having me. I'm super excited to be here.
Hooray! So, we were just talking right before we started about the bats on your wall. So, very spooky. I love it. So, are you writing anything spooky right now? Anything paranormal? What are you working on?
Um, so it's kind of a crazy month for me. I have quite a few releases. As of the time of this recording, it is October 18th. So yesterday I dropped Monster Spell, which is a Monster Academy romance. It's kind of
Okay.
like college age Harry Potter.
Nice.
And it's part of the Blackthorn Academy for Supernatural's Shared World series. And today, October 18th, actually happens to be the anniversary of my monster romance, Monsters of Ashwood.
Okay, cool.
So the first book, Voices in the Dark, came out a year ago today,
Oh
which
my
is
goodness.
just
Okay.
amazing to think of. So, and
Congratulations.
I'm literally always writing paranormal or monster-ish romances. So, currently I'm working on some stuff for my Hunter Games series that probably won't be out until next year. And that is a spin-off series from my Ava Crowley Vampire Slayer series. So,
Okay, that's amazing. So, do you have a favorite kind of paranormal creature to write about?
vampires. Vampires are like, that's my wheelhouse. I grew up, obsessed with like vampires and vampire romance. So that's probably like my number one. But I also really enjoy writing shifters. So,
Okay. So what's your favorite thing about vampires?
oh gosh, there's just like so much. I think a lot of it to me is like the immortality aspect, but also just kind of like I feel like mostly in media, a lot of vampires are very sophisticated. They
Okay.
have like this sort of elegance to them. Even some of the more gritty vampires who maybe aren't so eloquent, there's still like this like elegance to the immortality and the bloodlust and like
Yeah,
I don't know, that just speaks to me.
I love that. No, I totally agree. And it's really fun because, like you mentioned, the immortality kind of gives you a lot of opportunities for expanding your world and pushing your plot in different directions that you might not normally be able to go.
That's one of the things that I enjoyed I think the most about writing in the Ava Crowley Vampire Slayer series because my MC vampire who's been around a while we get to see because it's part of a larger series
Oh,
spanning
cool.
from my Forevermore world. You get to see like him in the past in that series and like who he was, and then you know centuries later who is he, because you're not going to be the same person forever, and I
Yeah.
love playing with stuff like that. So yeah, I think that's one of the things that I like the most about vampires.
Okay, that's really cool. Yeah, and I like what you said. We're not the same person forever, even with like normal human lifespans. And so revisiting the same vampire must be pretty fun.
I love it. I try not to have favorites, but I love Ava and Cass. They're a lot of fun to write. So
That's amazing. I love that. So what about shifters? What kind of shifters do you like?
I prefer wolf shifters or
Okay.
werewolves, either or. But I also like reading odd shifters, like stuff that's not of the typical variety. So, my co-author Quelty Fox and I write a shifter reverse harem series called The Shifters of Starfall Creek. And she does some oddball shifters. She just came out with recently a red panda shifter, and
Okay.
she's done capybara shifters, and so like I enjoy reading some stuff like that too, like where it's just a little bit different than
Yeah,
the others. So
that's really cool. I love that. I've actually written a red panda shifter also, and it was so fun because like you said, like I love that you called it like an oddball shifter. That's totally what it was. And it was a really different experience for me from riding like a dragon or a wolf.
mhm.
So, do you have any plans to venture into any other shifters that you're riding, or do you kind of?
I would love to do another shifter series, and I think I would like to do like on my own. I would like to do maybe like big cats.
Oh, cool.
Or I would really, really like to do a shark shifter. Like, I would love to do that at some point. But that's in the concept board somewhere.
Yeah, I feel like one of the hard things about being a writer is we have all these ideas, and would you say that there's not enough time to write them all?
Yeah, yeah. And I write pretty fast. So
Okay, cool.
I typically write maybe like 1 to 3 books at a time.
Okay.
And I release quite frequently. So I believe right now with Monster Spell, I want to say it was like my 20th book this year. So I
Okay,
write a lot and I write
congratulations.
fast.
That's awesome. So, what is a typical start to finish book writing journey look like for you? Do you like sit down with your tea and you're like, I'm ready, I'm gonna, sprint, or how does that?
I'm kind of a caffeinated squirrel with ADHD. So, for me, my process is a little bit more pure chaos, I think, than most people's. I because of my crazy attention span, that's I think why I'm able to write in like multiple books at once. So it kind of
Okay.
I go from one to the next. It gives me fresh eyes again, going back and forth. But for the most part, I kind of have a mishmash of a little bit of more pantser with a little bit of plotter.
Okay.
So I meet in the middle where I kind of hash out an idea. I usually know what I'm going to do from start to finish, and then I kind of just like do it like almost like 5 chapters at a time.
Okay.
Sometimes I'll outline the whole thing and then I'll just go back and rewrite it.
Cool.
But for the most part, it's just kind of like blocked at a time. So
Okay. That works. So do you usually write in the same place? Like, are you a coffee shop kind of person or an at-home person?
I am a couch potato. I write on my couch. I've written all my books on my couch.
Okay.
So that's like kind of like my vibe. Like I chill here with I got my warming blanket. I usually have my cup of coffee and I'm good to go.
I love that. That's really cool. So, have you always known that this was what you wanted to write? Or were you ever like, no, I'm going to write children's books or I'm going to write, a memoir? Or did you kind of always have an idea?
So I got into writing in 2020, and I kind of always wanted to be a writer. I always wanted to be an author and write books, but because of my ADHD, I honestly thought that like I wasn't capable of doing it because I was like the queen of starting projects and like abandoning them or like just get fizzled out or whatever, and I
Yeah.
didn't think I had the discipline to like write a whole book. Like I'd been writing, I had books that I'd been working on for like multiple years, and they were just like never going to be finished. So in like around 2020-ish, I signed up to do an anthology,
Okay.
and it was a charity anthology, and I thought I was going to force myself to write something new. It was just going to be a short story, and if I had a deadline, maybe I could like do it. And it just kind of took off from there. I ended up getting the story published. It's called Faded, and you can actually get it when you sign up for my newsletter now. I had it published and it was just like then COVID hit
Yeah.
and suddenly I had the time to write a book. And I was like,
Okay.
well, I'm going to try to write a book.
Yeah.
And I did. And after that it just kind of steamrolled. I got hooked up with my publisher at the time. My first book was part of an anthology. And then after that I wrote the second book. After that I signed on with her publishing house and here we are. So
Okay. That's really cool. What an interesting journey.
it's been
So,
a wild one, I will tell you that.
so what has surprised you the most about that transition from reader to author? Like, was there
I
anything that just kind of stood out?
I think and one of the funny things is before I really started writing, I reviewed books.
Oh, cool.
So I reviewed books for online book club and I would write reviews. And I'd always been a fan of romance. Like I read a lot of romance growing up, but not necessarily like most of the self-published romance that's out there. I was reading like Avon romance at the time I was a teenager or
Okay.
like some young adult stuff, but it wasn't like real strictly romance and. Um so when I started reviewing for online book club, I was reviewing primarily like independent romance novels. And I was like, it's funny to think of because I was like the perfect candidate for that because I didn't really read it. So I was like reading it with fresh eyes. And I blasted some books at some point in time because I just didn't get it. It wasn't my
Yeah.
genre at the time. So I think what's funny is that I ended up writing romance and then doing that made me understand the tropes more and
Yeah.
the genres more, and like that this was a thing for a reason, or these certain types of books had their certain audiences, that it wasn't just written to be a certain way, it was written for a certain audience. And at that point in time, it wasn't that audience, and that's okay. So I think that was probably the most surprising part, was just understanding how much goes into some of those tropes, some of
Yeah.
those things, the marketing, all of that.
So do you have a favorite trope now?
Now that I know more about tropes, I can identify that my favorite tropes have always been fated mates, enemies to lovers, and friends, and like best friends to lovers. That's another one I'm
Okay.
like a fork in me, I'm done.
I love that. Okay, I love Fated Mates too. What do you like the most about that?
I just love the whole like strings of destiny part, where it's like
Oh
these
yeah.
people who are just, for me, a lot of times I like to double up on those tropes. So I like the enemies to lovers with the fated mates a lot, where it's like these two people who just like should not be together, cannot like stand each other, but they are meant to be together, and you know that they are going to be like absolutely like end game, like that's going to be it, and it's going to be a joy to watch. So I love reading those because I like to see how we come from all the way out
Yeah.
at the edges to like these perfect pairings.
Well, I feel like that's really fun too. Like the thing I love about enemies to lovers is when they know they're fated mates and they get upset about it.
Mhm.
I just feel like that's really fun. Like as a reader, as a writer, it's really fun to kind of get to play with that and see the characters just like resisting and going to all these like great lengths to not get together and they
Mhm.
must.
I love tension, and I do really like slow burn. I write a mixture. So I have some fast burn, I have some medium, I have some slow, some insta love, some not. But I love the tension. I love it when you drag it out for 10 books and you're like, "Oh, are they gonna kiss already?" Like that's like my favorite.
That's really fun because I feel like by the time you get there, like it's built up so much that it's just that much more satisfying.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah.
So, do you have a favorite book that you've written out of all of your books? Like a number one, this is like your pride and joy.
I'm gonna say it's a toss up.
Okay.
It's a three-part toss up.
That, that's
So, probably like I want to say like my number one favorite would probably be one of my Ava Crowley books, and I'm gonna say it's probably gonna be Blood and Ash, which was the last Ava Crowley book that I wrote, because it was pulling all those strings together. It was setting certain things up. It's part of, it leads into a little bit of the other series as well, but I was able to play with more things in that one, because I had already established, and I deal with some tough things in there, at least for Ava. So, and it was probably a more emotional one because there were plot points and things that I'd been setting up for multiple books at this point.
okay.
And I think that too, with that slow burn and that tension, it's like it's the perfect flame in that one with Ava and Cass, because they're still not together yet,
Yeah.
but you can tell they're starting to gravitate, and I just, that one I think is probably my number one. My number two would probably be Monsters of Ashwood, because it is a little bit darker than most of my other books, which it stands out as the darkest book that I've written, Voices in the Dark. Um, and I really enjoyed writing that one because I enjoyed playing with those darker themes and pushing my writing to a place that I hadn't before.
Okay.
So I deal with a lot more they're monsters. The FMC has a really dark past. There's some major dark romance vibes in there. But just being able to be a little bit more graphic, and being
Mhm.
able to do a little bit more gritty type story, that probably is why I put it at my number two, because it's, to this day, it is like, it is the Shadow, and there is nothing else I have that is like it.
Okay.
And I love that. And then my third would have to be Shifters of Starfall Creek, which I co-write with Quality Fox, because that was my first reverse harem novel, and it was
Okay.
my first shifter novel, and it was my first crack at Steam. When we wrote Hollow Sunrise, Before that, I was still kind of new to writing. Wasn't really like comfortable writing certain types of steam yet because I didn't know if I could.
Okay.
And I paired up with Quell. We wrote Hollow Sunrise together, and so I learned a lot during that book about myself and being able to test myself and kind of jump off the cliff a little bit.
Okay.
So that would be the top three.
Okay. That's cool. I like that your choices are all very different from each other,
Mm-hmm.
but all written on the couch.
Mm-hmm.
I
Yep.
love that. So, what's been the hardest thing for you about being a writer?
Uh, that's a good one. So this year I transitioned to being a full-time author.
Congratulations.
So that transition from, having a day job and coming home and writing and like just going crazy, like
Yeah.
nonstop, like not sleeping and staying up late. It was obviously a big transition.
Mm,
Especially too when you're used to, clocking in and clocking out.
yeah.
Essentially, like I know a lot of people who are work for themselves will say the same thing. It's establishing that routine.
Oh,
It's
absolutely.
building a routine within being able to do kind of like build stuff how you want to build it, but
Yeah.
also at the same time giving yourself room to take care of yourself and do things outside of work. So I think that's been the biggest transition for me is just going from, normal regular day job to like this is my job. And I write books full time now. Um that would be it.
Okay. Yeah, no, that makes perfect sense. And one thing I know from your Q&A is that you also talked about how you do book events.
Mhm.
Can you talk about your favorite book event that you've been to?
Oh, so that's going to be fun because I just started doing book events this year.
Okay.
So I started in, I want to say this past June was my
Okay.
first event, and it was Flirty in Tampa.
Okay,
And
cool.
then I did Romanticon as well this year. And I have about 5 events scheduled for next year. So while I can't say that I have like a favorite book event yet, before I started doing book events, I'm a cosplayer.
Okay.
So I went to Comic Cons, and I could tell you my favorite one, hands down, for everything, whether you want to talk about books, fandom stuff, is definitely Dragon Con.
Ooh,
The last Dragon Con I went to in 2021 was the first one I attended, author panels and writer panels and things like that. So they really do have something for everybody. So, even if you're not going for books or if you are going for books,
yeah.
there's plenty of panels and plenty of tracks to keep everyone entertained.
Okay, that's really cool. So, with the cosplayer background and then kind of transitioning to attending events as an author, was there anything that surprised you, or did you feel really ready for like the interaction with readers?
I don't think I was ready at all because I was a
Oh,
little nervous and I was a little terrified, like being behind the table,
okay,
just because I had like no idea what I was doing. But
fair.
thankfully, I have my best friends who come with me as my assistants. So I had them there to support me, and we all kind of like got through it together at Flirty in Tampa. I had my husband, so I wasn't
Oh,
doing it by myself But I
yeah,
think what surprised me was I was just excited to meet people,
yeah.
and meet readers and things like that. And I wasn't necessarily expecting much because I'm still kind of new, still kind of underground, I guess you could say. So I was just like happy to be there, man. Happy to be sitting at the cool kids table.
Aw.
And I had some readers, I think it was at Flirty in Tampa, who came up to me and were like, I was looking for you specifically, and I wanted to like cry. I was so
Aw,
excited.
I love that. That's so sweet. That's really cool. No, I feel like a lot of times as writers, it can be kind of a lonely job. And a
Yeah.
lot of times, even though we know we have readers, there's a certain distance there. And being able to kind of have that face-to-face connection and talk about the characters and see people's body language and, you cry, they cry, everybody tears up a little.
Yeah.
Really fun.
Yeah, it was definitely an experience, and I absolutely loved it. So yeah, that's why I signed up for 5 conventions next year because I was like, I love this. I want to keep doing this.
So which five are you going to next year?
So far, I believe I have on the schedule, I am doing Romanticon again next year. I am
Okay.
doing Getting Witchy with It
Oh,
in Salem. I'm also confirmed to do Authors in the Steel City and
okay.
Flirty in Tampa for next year, and then I'm still waiting to hear back from a few.
Okay. That's awesome. Well, congratulations.
Thank you.
That's super cool. So what's something that you're really looking forward to about your book events next year? Do you like the travel or just meeting people?
Both, but I'm kind of excited. I want to dress up a little bit more. So I'm like, maybe I'll cosplay as one of my characters at the event or something.
Okay.
Or Getting Witchy with It has their witches ball. I just really want an excuse to wear one of my ball gowns.
Oh
So
yeah,
I might
that's
just do
totally
that.
valid. I love that. That'll be really cool. Okay, so question.
Mhm.
You have written quite a bit. You're very prolific, which is cool. What's a piece of advice you would give to somebody who hasn't published yet, who wants to?
I would just say to keep writing. A lot of times we ask ourselves like, what if?
Yeah.
And I am the person who I was the queen of what if, right? I was
Okay.
like, what if I am no good? What if my book sucks? What if nobody reads it? What if nobody likes it?
Yeah.
And at some point I just kind of said to myself, despite all of that, I said, well, what if I just want to do it?
Yeah.
Like, what if I just want to say that I did it? Like, oh, and then I did it. Okay. And so it wasn't necessarily like blocking out those things, the what ifs, but just saying in spite of those what ifs, well, what if I just want to do it? And if you just
Yeah.
want to do it, do it. Just right. The first draft is supposed to be a first draft. It's not supposed to be perfect. You
Yeah.
can't edit a blank page. So just keep writing, and you'll get there. You'll find it.
Yeah. I love that. I think that's really good advice because I think for a lot of people, just the idea of pushing through, getting it written, finishing something can be really, really terrifying. And I also think a lot of people jump ahead to wondering, oh, how am I going to market? Which cover artist do I want to use? Instead of just kind of focusing on finishing the story.
And that was my problem for a very long time. That's why I had three books that were open ended that were never gonna see the light of day. And I said, well, let's try a different route. Let's give us a deadline. Let's try to write something else and
Yeah,
see where we go with that. And because of that, here I am. So just keep writing, just keep doing it.
I like that. So, have you found that authors in the author community were helpful to you when you were starting? Did you feel kind of alone, like you were kind of going through it by yourself? What was your experience like on that side of
I
things?
I think I have had probably the best experience. I know that some authors will say that the community can be toxic at times. It cannot
Okay,
be fun. While other people have different experiences. My experience personally was I was met with open arms pretty much everywhere.
cool.
And I had a lot of support from other authors who I just met or whatever,
Yeah,
to ask questions in certain groups. And from the get-go, it's always been very much a rising tide lifts all boats for me,
yeah,
which in turn is why I will always say, if I'm not an expert on anything, but feel free to text me, message me, ask
cool.
me whatever. You need somebody to look at your at your scene you wrote, you're not sure how it goes, I will look at it. I like to try to help as much as I can because I know how beneficial and helpful it was for me when I was starting and had no idea what I was doing.
Yeah. No, I totally feel the same way. And I feel like in many ways, I feel very lucky that we live at a time when authors are connecting online in such a big way because I know that hasn't always been the case. And
Right.
so I feel like it's really fantastic how readily accessible many other authors are, so that if we have questions, it's easy to say, well, this person's done this before. I can kind of ask them how that went.
Right. Yeah, I agree.
Okay, awesome. So what about, I wanted to ask you about co-writing. What was your experience like with that? Did you and your co-writer plot out the story? Did you take a chapter and they took a chapter? What did that process look like?
So I co-write with quite a few people,
Oh, okay.
and they're all very different in
Oh,
their
interesting.
approach to how they work. So while I have some co-authors who dictate, and then go in and clean stuff up. I have other co-authors who will just sit down and write whatever comes to mind, and others plan it out.
Okay.
So it's just kind of, that's one of the things I enjoy about co-writing, is that I like kind of being able to adapt to
Oh,
different
cool. Okay.
styles and different voices.
Yeah.
Usually it is one of us taking a character and the other person taking another, or
Okay.
in the case of where I write with Quell, we wrote a reverse harem, we had more than one character. um and then during that process, once we were done with our books, we kind of went in and edited each other's stuff,
Oh, nice.
just to kind of make it a little bit more cohesive, that it has one voice, which I know for some people can be a hairy situation, because essentially somebody's going in and editing your stuff, and that can be hard to take sometimes, just like when you have a book edited.
Oh, yeah.
um but I feel like part of that process itself, of having somebody else go in, edit my stuff, say, oh well, here maybe you could add this, or I would suggest saying this another way, it helps me as an author become a better writer. So just like in editing, when I'm co-writing, I learn from the people that I'm working with as well, and that helps,
Yeah.
that helps my skills as well.
Absolutely. And I think it's really good to kind of approach the process of writing a book as just that, a process.
Mhm.
And it's always a situation where we can learn something new every time we write a story. I know for me, like every single book I write is a slightly different experience, and I always walk away with something a little bit different and something new, which is kind of fun.
Yeah, I totally agree. Every book I write is different, and I learn something new from each one. Yeah, so I can totally agree with that.
So how do you like to plot out your characters? Do you like to base your characters off people you know? Do you think, oh, I'd love a character who's going through this situation or facing this obstacle? Or what does that look like for you?
So I always kind of say it's kind of a funny answer to that, because it makes me sound a little bit crazy, but my characters are very real to me. So
Okay.
they speak to me in a sense as who they are. As I write, I discover who they are.
Okay.
That's not to say that they're not inspired by certain people, because they definitely are. As in the case of Ava Crowley, Vampire Slayer.
Yeah.
Ava is a mishmash of people that I know, just as much as she is a mishmash of Dean and Buffy. So there's little bits and pieces of like my besties. Like I think
Yeah.
I even wrote in my one friend's book, Ava drinks whiskey because you do. So there's
Aw.
little bits and pieces from everywhere, from media, from people I know, in all of my characters. But mostly as I write, I discover the character as I go, and they just
Yeah.
kind of have their own voice. And many of them are very strong, like Ava or Jade or even Jenna from Monsters of Ashwood. They just have very strong voices. But then I have other characters who it takes a little bit more to get to know, like Violet from Monster Spell. But part of discovering who their personality is what's fun to me as an author.
Okay.
So
I totally agree. And it's really nice that it sounds like all of your characters have very different personalities, which is kind of fun.
they do, yeah.
That's
I
really cool.
typically write a little bit more strong-willed
Yeah.
FMCs. That's kind of my niche, but
Okay.
I love to challenge myself, so I do have some softer spoken characters as well, with the inner strength that isn't
Yeah.
always as visible too. So yeah, they're all
Okay.
very different.
I love that. So this has been really fun. This has been super cool getting to talk to you and hearing a little bit more about your work and your process and your experiences. Can you tell everybody watching where they can find your books and where they can connect with you?
So I'm pretty much everywhere that you can think of. I am on TikTok as less underscore than three. I am on Instagram as Wrong Turn Romance. That's my bookstagram that I started when I was reviewing books, and I still post on that.
Okay.
And Facebook. My books are pretty much everywhere. I have some books that are wide. Most of my books are in Kindle Unlimited. But I'm just pretty much everywhere.
Okay, amazing. Well, hey, thank you again so much for taking the time to talk with me. This has been really fantastic.
Thank you for having me.
It was wonderful.